Okay, so I'm going to just give you a little tutorial on page 20 and 21 in your theory book. I think that is just those 2 pages, which have got 4 exercises on them. Okay, it's entitled Degrees of the Scale and Intervals. Okay, so I've got a rather large stave here, or a couple of music staves. Now in a scale, including the scales that you play, it's based on 8 notes. Okay, or 8 degrees as they're called in music. So for instance, if I put in a treble clef and I do a simple scale such as C major, starts on C, D, E, I'm gonna have to make my notes a bit bigger, F, G, A, B and C. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are the 8 degrees of a scale. And if you come down from a scale, coming back down, you must count backwards 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so they are called degrees, not just numbers, degrees of the scale. And then you just repeat the same 8 notes for another octave if you're doing 2 octave scales. When you get to grade 6, you have to do 4 octaves for scales, so you have to do 4 lots of 8. Okay, so that's basically the degrees of the scale. Now an interval, which is the other thing that they're dealing with here, is the distance between any 2 of these notes. Okay, now generally the intervals that you'll be looking at the moment will be based on your key note. Now the key note is the name of the key that you're dealing with. Okay, so C is the keynote for C major, G is the keynote for G major, and so on. Okay, and usually it will be the distance between that note C and any other notes in that scale, or of those 8 notes. So for instance, if I want to know the interval between the C and maybe the F, I count calling the keynote number 1. That's the important thing to make sure you do. Call the keynote number 1, 2, 3, 4. So then that interval between the C and the F is called a fourth. So with intervals, we do call them second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and when you put octave, you put 8 VE. You don't put eighth, you put 8 VE for octave. That's a shortened version of it. And that would be if the interval was between the C and the top C, the 8th note. It would be 1 to 8, which is an 8th. Okay, so it's really very straightforward. Now, there are 2 types of intervals. Let's choose a different key. Let's choose G major. Now, G major, when you play the scale, you include an F sharp. So we have to write the F sharp on the stave like that. You've covered this when you did scales, writing out scales in this theory book a few pages ago. So you might want to look back and see where the key signatures were written for each one. So if this is G major, excuse me, let's put that down. Put G major, okay. Any interval that you're being asked will always have the G, and I'm just going to use that G on that line because it keeps it on the stave. It could be any G, but that's fine, that one. And any other note between that and the next G above, okay? So maybe I want to know what this interval is between these 2 notes, okay? So remember, you call the key note, which is G in this case, number 1. The next note between that would be the A, which is note 2, or degree 2. And so the B is degree 3. So that means then that that interval is a third. Okay, let's do another one. Again, I pick G. Remember, this is called the key note because it's the key of the extract that we're using, or the example that we're using. So G is your keynote. It's also degree number 1 in your scale. Okay, and let's pick any note between here and the next G. So I'm going to go a long way away to the F sharp up the top there. So I'm going to count very carefully now, because you must make sure you count all the spaces and the lines in between. So G is number 1. The space next door is number 2. The next line is number 3. The next space is number 4. The next line is number 5. The next space is number 6. So the next line then is the 7th. Okay, so that interval between those two notes is an interval of a 7th, and that's how you would write your answer. Okay, so these are intervals. These are just showing you the degrees of the scale 1 to 8, or 8 to 1 if you're going backwards. Showing you what the keynote is, that it's the name and the key that you're dealing with, and the bottom note will always be your keynote. You can tell the key, either they'll tell you what the key is, or you can tell by the key signature. So you do need to know some of your key signatures really well. 1 sharp, F sharp is G major, it belongs to G major. So G will always be the bottom note of the interval, and then I'm just counting the lines and spaces to whatever is the next note that I've been given, including number 1 for the first note, and then counting carefully all the spaces and lines between those. Try not to miss any out. Now there are 2 types of interval which they do deal with. You have these where they're spread apart like that, and they are called melodic intervals. Okay, so if for instance in this exercise, you might not be able to see this so easily, but here you've got actual melodies of music, okay, rather than just individual notes like that. But it's the same idea. For example, the first one here, this is exercise 4, we're in C major here because the bottom note of the interval that they're asking you for, just look where the bracket is C. And also the key signature has no flats or sharps, and we know C major has no flats or sharps in it. So there's 2 clues there that tell us that it's C major. So C is your key note, or degree number 1. The next note they're looking at is an E. So counting from the C to the E, we go through C, D and E, or 1, 2 and 3. So the interval there is a third, but it occurs within a melody of music. The notes are in succession, but they're not written together as a chord. Okay, so you just look at where the bracket is between those 2 notes of the bracket, choose the bottom note as your key note, your number 1 degree, and then just count on to wherever the next one is, that one there. Okay, so that's G major, just like we've been working in with the F sharp. The G is the bottom note of the interval, and then E is the upper note. So you count from G being number 1, 2, 3, and then count it up. Okay, that's that exercise. Now the one above there, it shows you harmonic intervals. Now harmonic intervals, harmonic means harmony. That's when you have more than one sound together. So for instance, a chord would make a harmony. So this simply, if I put these same 2 intervals here as harmonic intervals, I just put the G and the B one over the top of the other. Or the other one was G and the F sharp. Okay, I hope they're over the top of each other. I'm sort of doing this sideways. Okay, so it's the same, exactly the same interval. It's just 2 different ways of writing it. This is the melodic form and this is the harmonic form. Okay, so hopefully I've given you quite a thorough explanation there of degrees of the scale and intervals, so that you can then hopefully complete the 2 pages, page 20 and 21 in your book, and ask somebody to scan them over to me so I can mark them for you. Okay.